Good morning, chess fans. I'm Max Murray, your host of the Max Murray Show. We are working our way through the chess.com chess bots, the advanced chess bots, who run from ratings of 1500 all the way up to 2100, three typically in every category: 15, 16, 17, and so on. This is Wally, a fellow countryman from Scotland. He is the second of the 1800 bots. I defeated Lorenzo after a huge slog yesterday. Lorenzo was the first of the 1800 bots. The game was 2 hours and 48 minutes. I knew it was going long when I was playing. It was a difficult middle and end game for me. I'm a little shocked the game took that long, so there's going to be a lot less yammering and a lot less pushing wood on the board today, or at least I hope so. I'm not at my best either, and it kind of reminds me of something I heard a Marine saying on Instagram, where I get most of my sources of wisdom, knowledge, and education. The Marine said, "This is, by the way, good coffee and bad chess. Good morning, chess fans." The Marine said the epitome of being a Marine was performing at a high level when you're not at your best. Um, and that's what we have to do here. I'm not at my best. However, I'm going to have to perform at a high level. Now, some people are very good at great feats of intellectual output when they are exhausted and tired mentally. I am not one of those people. I'm going to do my best here, rub some dirt on it, walk it out, and try to adapt, improvise, and overcome. I am playing d2, d4 against my fellow Scotsman, Wally. Wally is reputedly, according to the copyright text, or let's call it the copywritten text, for Wally here. He is an endgame specialist, so I'm like, oh my goodness, that could mean another brutally long endgame. And you can see I'm already deep into the chat, and the yakkering and the yammering, and giving you the stream of consciousness, the hamster wheel, if you will, of my thought process as we go through these moves. I play d4, d2, d4. I play the same opening system against every black try, unless they force me to deviate, and that's d4, knight to f3, e3, bishop to e2, and castles. And so he's played now d6. The interesting thing about this try by Wally is d6 is what I play. I play d6 against everything. Occasionally, you don't see me much so far in this YouTube series playing against these lower rated bots of taking black. I've decided I'm just going to take white every game until I lose. I did, in fact, lose badly to a 1600 bot. It was a disaster, absolute train wreck. 2 games in a row I lost against a 1600. The 1600 was punching well above his weight. And I got handled very roughly, and I still have a little bit of PTSD from the one game in particular. Against the 1800 bot Lorenzo, I did do a screenshot here of my performance. I was at an 84% accuracy and a 2,000 point rating, according to the game review on chess.com. There were a number of inaccuracies, no less than a dozen during that game. It was a long game. I forget the exact number of moves, but it was over 60. My opponent had the computer bot had 14 inaccuracies though, so I was a little less inaccurate than my opponent. I did make one mistake, and I did make one blunder. The thing about the blunder though was it didn't cost me the game. I was actually ahead at the time that I made the blunder. I was well ahead and firmly winning. The blunder cost me a pawn, and most of my winning opportunities. Something that's kind of funny though about my recollection of that game is I thought the endgame was a lot closer than the computer said it was. The computer gave me a +2, +3 evaluation throughout the endgame, and I thought really that the computer was equalizing. So the computer is playing a King's Indian style setup here. King's Indian, distinguished by the fianchetto of the black dark squared bishop to the long diagonal, and d6, followed up usually by knight on b to d2. He will castle, of course, and then white will essay. Black will essay either the classic King's Indian break at some point, e5, or black will try one of the more exotic branches of the King's Indian, of which there is a very bushy hedge with many branches and leaves, and play c7, c5. I will respond with the distinguishing move of my system, moving the bishop to e2 and not to d3. And black will pounce like a cougar by moving the anti-collie bishop, or what I call the anti-collie bishop, to the f5 square. Now you can see bishop d3 would be impeded by the direct imposition of the opposing light squared bishop. However, I'm not at all daunted, because against the collie proper, moving the bishop to d3, and I'll try not to waste a lot of time talking about the collie system. I spend more time talking about the collie system than I do about my own opening system here, which the computer, by the way, calls the Yusupov-Rubinstein setup. Right now, the computer is taxonomically defining this entire situation on the 64 squares as the Tartakower defense, which that doesn't sound right. Tartakower defense is, that I know, is the Queen's Gambit, and the distinguishing move is actually b7, b6. There's a black pawn on d5 supported by a black pawn on e6. This bishop has developed to e7, and black has not touched his g-pawn. That's the Tartakower defense. But anyway, I digress. So I don't know what's going on here, if this is a Tartakower. I'm not too concerned about my putting my collie, my bishop on d3 for the collie when black plays an early move here, like he did on move 3 of g6, because the collie bishop then is biting on granite, as Nimzowitsch said. It's biting on that strongly supported g-pawn. The collie bishop stronger when black has not touched his g-pawn, then it has a natural target on h7, and that often forms the basis of a kingside attack once white has pulled off the thematic collie move e3, e4. Again, this formation, though, is considered something of an antidote to the collie system. So black is sort of justified by move bishop e2, which is the less active of the two squares, e2 and d3. I'm going to castle. That's my fifth move. This now is classic. I've played hundreds of games from this exact formation. Okay, do you see all these highlights? I've played hundreds of games from this formation. I've had quite a bit of success on .com. I'm winning well over 50% of my games against similarly rated opponents. It is, yes, a passive, but it is a very strongly defensive setup. Black will not get any sort of whirlwind attack against me. Most chess players, I say, are attacking chess players. Let's think about it as a pie. 75%, I would say, of chess players are attacking chess players. They push their pieces forward and like to play on their opponent's side of the board. But 25% of us, though, are positional players. We look at squares on our side of the board or on the enemy side of the board. We're not ones to start a scuffle. We like to get our pieces to good squares instead. Now, the next question after I've made these first 5 moves in what I'm still thinking as the Yusupov-Rubinstein system until I come up with a better name for it. The next issue for me is development of my queen side. The principles of chess say you develop knights before bishops, but if I put my knight on c3, a la like a Jubava London, but the London system involves getting the dark square bishop outside the pawn chain, then I'm blocking my c-pawn if I put my knight there on c3. With the anti-collie bishop, I've been experimenting a lot recently with just moving it because it becomes a target after black plays knight to c6 and then knight to b4. The c2 pawn becomes a target. I've experimented with moving it to c3 attacking, controlling the b4 square, which is somewhat critical on my king side, and then developing, as in the Collie proper, by picking up my bishop, moving it to d3 again, trading off the light squared bishops, putting my queen on d3, moving knight on b to d2, pushing my rook to e1, and finally the point of the whole thing, the kicker, the punchline, if you will, e3, e4, a break in the center. The standard setup, though, since black is not really going to threaten this right away, and it's a stronger move by and large to c3. The computer poo-poos c3, doesn't like it. I think there are better situations, more dire situations when c3 becomes necessary in this setup, but I'm going to move c2, c4. Now I can move knight to c3 and develop it without blocking my c-pawn. And I've created a pawn duo with a foothold in the center on d4, and controlling the four squares directly in front of these pawns. I very much like that. Notice black has played knight on b to d7. In other words, black is developing exactly as you would expect for a King's Indian. What he's done, though, is thrown in this move, h6, and I don't know why he's thrown that move in, because I had absolutely no intention of putting my bishop on my knight on the g5 square. No intention whatsoever, chess fans, of playing knight g5, and my bishop is not a threat at this time to develop along the dark squares. And in fact, in my system, I'm going to play b3 or possibly even b4 here, since black is allowing it, gaining all this space on the queen side, 3 pawns in a row. Even sometimes, wait for it, moving my a-pawn to a4 and creating a 4-pawn Chinese wall right across the border, a Hadrian's wall, if you will, right on the border of the hinterlands of my side of the board. Then I develop my bishop. This is the point. I develop my bishop to the long dark square diagonal. I'm having a hard time getting to the point this morning. There is going to be some rambling. Fasten your seatbelts. We will continue simply developing. There's no particular goal here, as in you see in the Collie. I'm not necessarily trying to force e3, e4, but what I am doing is I'm playing on the queen side. And I'm finding that, I ask myself sometimes, what is the difference between a bishop that is developed, as black has here, into the fiend shadow position, or developing the bishop on the e7 square, which is the other classical place where black will put a bishop. The bishop on g7 objectively is a stronger piece during the middle game because it controls the longest dark square diagonal on the board. And that diagonal also happens to run directly through the center. Therefore, a bishop on the long dark square diagonal has a great deal of scope and has very powerful influence on the key squares, key central squares, namely 2 of them, d4 and e5. However, it takes an extra move to fiend shadow your bishop. It takes work. You got to play g7, g6 first. That's a move. That's a tempo. The second, okay, well, you're saying, well, you have to move the e-pawn, don't you? Yes, but you're often going to occupy the center anyway with these pawns. So it's moving the g-pawn is somewhat gratuitous. Moving the e-pawn is virtually required. But the difference, though, between I'm thinking as I think about it, both how to play against this and for it, and considering that I have not finchetted my light squared bishop, I've not tried a Catalan type setup. I've not tried to put my light squared bishop on the longest light squared diagonal and control the key squares e4 and d5 from a distance, a la the hypermoderns. Instead, I've put my bishop on e2, an allegedly passive square. But what the bishop on e2 does is it works on the flanks a little better. So black's bishop, fiend shadow as it is pressuring the center and working on the center. But my bishop, my light squared bishop, the mirror opposite of his dark squared bishop, is working on the flanks, specifically the queen side. Notice that black has further strengthened my light squared bishop's prospects on the queen side by moving his own light squared bishop away to the anti-Collie square f5. Yes, he is influencing e4, a very key square, but if I never intend to play e3, e4, then is this bishop really doing the yeoman's work? Just noticing now, it's important. I got to start paying attention to the tactics in the position. The move bishop d b to d7 is also restricting the retreat of this bishop. So it's very possible I may want to play the anti-Collie bishop knight move. The anti move, play my knight to h5. This is a very common scenario in my opening setup, and threaten to take off the exchange of minor pieces and take off this light squared bishop with my knight. If the black tries just to get frisky with this bishop, then I can get an f3. If the bishop moves away, I can still pursue it. So if I moved here, he would actually have a problem. Because obviously recapturing with the g-pawn is very weakening to his position. But the point I wanted to make was he's moved this bishop away from his queen side. So now I'm looking at all these light squares on the queen side. I can actually couple that with a queen move, attacking his somewhat weakened b7 pawn, where now bereft of defense by the light squared bishop. And I can really get things going better over here in the absence of this bishop. My plan for blunting this monster, or potential monster, arguably the strongest bishop on the board if you're a connoisseur of the fianchetto. I'm more of a bishop, old Indian bishop d2, and this Rubinstein Yusupov version of the opening I play with the queen's pawn with bishop e2. My plan to blunt that is to play b3 or b4, like I was saying, and fianchetto my own dark squared bishop. My queen was likely, usually wants to come to c2, can't in this instance. So I have to fight against this bishop to develop my queen. I'm going to do that either by knight to h4, attacking it thusly, and I can and have played bishop to d3. And black, if black obliges with the exchange of light squared bishops, he's taken 2 moves. I've taken 2 moves, but I get my queen to the d3 square, and if this square is secure for the queen, that's an advantage sometimes of having a pawn on c3. So the knight can't come here to harass the queen. By here, I mean the b4 square. If I get my queen to d3, then she's very powerful. I've had a lot of success with my queen on d3. That I can also, with the exchange of these light squared bishops, I can commence Collie operations sometimes. So black is giving me now this opportunity to really harass this bishop, and I need to think about what is the most accurate move. What I normally want to do is finish my development, and I do that here. This is going to be plan A, is b4. Just ignore everything that black is doing, completely ignore it. Put a pawn on b4, control all these squares across the center and black's queen side, and even play a4 and commence a5 and really get space over here. And space, as Alekhine once said in one of his writings, space contains the seeds of victory. I'm actually sort of turning that quote around. He or either it was him or Lasker, I don't remember anymore. It's what happens when you get old. Said that if you're cramped, you have the seeds of defeat. Well, the opposite of that is space is the seeds of victory. That's the way I think about it. The reason is because the pieces have more good squares to choose from. And it creates cramp, meaning black has fewer good squares to choose from and can easily run out of good squares. Then they have to start putting pieces and pawns on bad squares, And once pieces and pawns go on bad squares, bad things happen. I can tell you from direct personal experience, having played D6 myself and often getting in the opening and often getting cramped positions. That's why sometimes I play for a classical Queen's Gambit. That's why I'm familiar with the Tartakower, which you support the central pawn by E6, and then eventually what you're going to do is you're going to develop your light squared bishop here after B6. Anyway, we're digressing. I've taken a lot of time again, just sort of pontificating about my opening thoughts. It's funny I can talk so much about this position and in such a rambling way, considering I've had this position hundreds of times now. Hundreds of times in serious daily 3 chess.com games where I play for the city of Dundee, and I've played for the Scotland, quote, national team. Also, I ceased playing them for several reasons, but I play for Scotland daily 3. I've got a dozen games going at any one time. I'm playing similarly rated players or higher in a tournament or match play type setting, and I've played serious games with this. I'm taking the opening seriously, bishop to B2. And interestingly enough, Keimer, the young child prodigy from Germany, has also experimented with queen pawn openings and an early bishop to E2. And he is coached by none other than Lecco, the drawing master, but one of the great chess players of all time. Lecco up there in the standings of strongest chess players never to have been world champion. There's a couple of those out there. Fabiano Caruana being the most recent example, perhaps, and to a certain extent Hikaru Nakamura, who may end up playing for the world champion depending on what goes on with Ding Liren. I hear that he's not doing particularly well for some reason, and I hope that's not the case. I really enjoy Ding Liren, the Chinese world champion. But if he were not unable to defend, then Hikaru Nakamura, based on his performance in the latest candidates tournament, would become a world championship challenger, and going against Gukesh, the meteoric Indian superstar who won the candidates tournament against all the odds and is now the world championship challenger. I'm really looking forward to that match. The only way to tell which player is the best in between two players is not look at their rating. I know that's what we do commonly, and it is being very mathematically modern. Us moderns put a lot of stock in numbers, statistics. But the best way to tell which of two players is stronger is not look at their rating, but set them down at the board and have them play many games against each other. They must play many games against each other because it's important that they face different circumstances and see how each player manages those different and varied circumstances against each other. The winner of that long match is the stronger player, and that is virtually a certainty. That is why, in my opinion, World Championship matches should be 24 games. Because I really think you need 24 games to determine which player is the strongest. That gives you the greatest variety of different types of positions and the most opportunities. World Championship matches have been as low as 12 games. In my opinion, that's not enough. That's like playing one set of tennis, okay, and deciding who's the better tennis player. One set just simply isn't enough. 12 chess games just simply isn't enough. 16 is enough, but that's really on the low end, in my opinion. Very much low on the one. And then the worst horror of all about the whole World Championship is deciding if the match is still tied after a low number of games, like 16, then going to speed chess. Because speed chess does not determine who is the better chess player. It just determines who's the better speed player. Skittles should never, ever, 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 ever decide a chess world championship. In my opinion, if a match is tied at the end, then the champion retains the belt. You have to beat beat the man if you want to be the man, as Ric Flair says. You got to beat the champion if you want to be the world chess champion. Okay, so that was quite the rant. All right, now I'm back to reality. Snap back to reality. Whoop, there goes gravity. That's Eminem, isn't it? Kind of a big decision for me, and I'm procrastinating, quite honestly. I can play knight h4 right here, interrupting for the moment my queenside pawn development. Interrupting my development is not bad in this situation because black has put zero pressure on me thus far. He has not castled yet. He's wasted one move, quote unquote, one move on h5, giving me an extra turn to get this knight onto c3. He still wants to bring his rook to the center so he can play e5. If indeed that is his plan, there's always, again, like I said, the break c5 also. Black is still a few moves away from executing either of these breaks, which means I can spend that time developing my queenside, but myself not really creating any sort of positional threats other than gaining space, which is actually no small threat. Like I said, there's seeds of victory. Once I've gained space, okay, now I've got one advantage. Typically, you need two advantages to win. Or, let's look at the mirror opposite. Typically, you need your opponent has to have two weaknesses that you can work on in order to win. Black can defend one weakness and draw. Black can be a pawn down and still draw quite easily in many positions. You need that, as white to win, you need that second problem. But having the space in the center like this, or having the space on the chessboard, is the first of my advantages and the first of his weaknesses, strategically speaking. The space often leads to a second weakness. For the reasons I was discussing earlier, a cramped position will often require black to put pieces on their suboptimal squares to the point at which a suboptimal square becomes a bad move and a weakness. That's where the space can induce the second problem. Then the combination of the space and that weakness typically gives me very good winning chances. All right, I have to decide now. So that's it. Do I grab the space and all this theoretical winning chances? I'm a little nervous about the knight on c3 becoming momentarily adrift. Okay, that's what happens in my opening system. When I play knights before bishops and then I play b3 to fiend shadow to the dark square, or b4 to grab the space, this knight is floating in space. Undefended pieces drop off. There is tactics along the long diagonal against the undefended knight, and even sort of worse for white is there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, my rook slumbering like a giant on the a1 square. Jack can travel down climb up the whole beanstalk and slay the giant. However, there is one impediment to black feasting along the long dark square by diagonal, and that is my opening system establishes a French Maginot-like strong point, the Atlantic Wall, if you will, during World War II along the Normandy coast, of a pawn on d4. And it is supported by another pawn on e3. One of the basic opening principles, put a pawn in the center and support it. My opening system, the Yusupov-Rubinstein, is based on pure opening principle rather than concrete tactical analysis. Strong point in the center. Develop the king's side pieces. Castle the king to safety. Bring the rook closer to the center for operations. Why? Because the center is where the open files are likely to open. Open files are likely to open in the center first. That is sheer opening principle. Then you can add in the other principles. Don't move pawns in front of your king. However, sometimes I will play the horns of the buffalo. I'll play h2, h3. Now I have what I call the bathtub, or this is an extended bathtub if we bring it all the way out to the d4 square. Very powerful pawn formation. Typically does not weaken my position and prepares for an endgame advance of the two interior pawns. It can be a hook, but with my knight defending my king, my light square bishop also present with often with this battery along the d1 to h5 diagonal, I have to open the door for the dog. I'm going to step away. I never do this. What I want you to do is go to the fridge, make yourself a bologna sandwich, pour yourself a cup of coffee so you can have good coffee at least with the bad chess moves. And I'll be right back in, wait for it, 30 seconds. I'm not going to edit the video, okay? I am not going to edit the video. I'm not putting myself through that. I'm capable. I know how to use iMovie. I'm capable of editing videos, but I won't be. I'll be right back. All right, so it is raining here in St. Louis along the banks of the mighty, muddy Mississippi River in the state of Missouri, the Show Me State. I'm still struggling. Get down, Toby, get down. I'm still struggling. Get down, Toby. I'm still struggling. He's excited now because I sprang up with such energy. The caffeine kicking in. We have maybe an hour or two before the systems start to shut down again. So maybe I need to prosecute this game at a much quicker pace while I'm still caffeinated. I'm still really, in the back of my mind, my subconscious, I'm working on what is the better of these two moves. But sometimes we ask ourselves, what would the computer do? Modern players playing more and more like computers. Computer actually likes h4 in similar positions. It is sometimes the computer's first move suggestion. I'm not saying that's the case here. I'm going to look at, and this is another thing I need to look at specifically, the King's Indian setup with what is the computer's considered opinion, silicon opinion on the knight to h4 exchange the light squared bishop plan. The only difference here is black is thrown in h6. I've kind of poo-pooed it. I really don't know what that pawn is doing. I don't see how that really benefits him. Sometimes h6 will follow later, or h5. The chess bots have been playing the AlphaZero like computer move h5 a lot against me. Lorenzo yesterday, the computer played both a5 and h5, a giant horns of the buffalo, attacking me down both the a file and the h file. But I cleverly maneuvered a rook to e5 and actually gobbled both of those pawns, not one but two. And then at that moment, when I was up the material equivalent of 2 pawns plus positional trumps, that's when I blundered and the game was more even. Speaking of which, I had the statistics. I played at 84% level and 2,000 rating. The chess bot allegedly rated 1,800. I actually played at a 1,900 level. But only a 77% accuracy. I was more accurate and higher rated as I played it and squeaked out the victory for that reason. An endgame that I thought the computer should have drawn but played badly turned out, according to computer analysis, to be completely winning for white. Probably why I managed to win it. If it had been drawn, probably the computer would have drawn it. At the time, I thought I was working with this is basically a drawn situation, and I was considering taking undue risks to try and make it winning again and things like that. So my intuition was just flat wrong. And once again, I was ultimately flat wrong about how accurately I thought I played the opening. I know you're not particularly interested in yesterday's game. You want to see this one. But the opening, I got a check mark, which is good, right? But for the middle game and the end game, I received stars as the overall, which star is the highest. That's the accuracy levels were higher. Well, the accuracy wasn't higher in the middle level, but my choice of moves were better, believe it or not. I don't know how that works out, but it does. The middle game, sort of my bugbear, is not my most accurate. The reason why is I spend a lot of time in my mind. As you can see, the hamster wheel is turning. I'm not really thinking through concrete variations. So let's get into the concrete right now. First, b4. b4 is fine. He's going to castle. Then I'll play a4. I've been in this situation a lot. Or I might play bishop to b2. Black can't not take advantage of the loose knight. In time, I will support the pawn, the knight. If you're a patzer out there, a real patzer, and you want to know how to stop losing games and you have a low rating, defend your pieces. It's that simple. Make sure every one of your pieces is defended. If you move it to an undefended square, then defend it the next move. You will stop dropping pieces, and when you stop dropping pieces, you start winning games at the lower rating levels. I learned that chess advice from, who was it? I want to say it was Andrea Botez, but I don't. Yeah, I think it was Andrea Botez who mentioned that. It's a good advice. Loose pieces drop off, defend them. If you're lower rated, make that a priority one, and you will stop losing games for dropping pieces. All right, now that we're going to look concrete at knight to h4. Sometimes the problem with knight on h4 is it's with the e-pawn gone. There can be tactics against that knight. It's difficult for black to get those tactics because black will very often have a bishop on f6, even if the pawn on the e7 pawn is gone, in which case it isn't. So currently, if I move the bishop to h4, this queen ploy is out. Sometimes black will have developed his dark square bishop more classically, and now the knight is in double jeopardy from a battery of queen and bishop on h4. That's not the case here because of the fianchetto. And if this bishop is sufficiently hemmed in by his pawns, then the knight on h4 always reserves the opportunity to sacrifice itself or exchange itself for the bishop before black gets the tempi necessary to take it off with a queen or bishop along the d8 to h4 diagonal. So this move is really screaming out to me, and it's doing it on several grounds. The embarrassment of the light squared bishop is quite intense. He may play e6 to defend it, but now he's really playing with fire, because if I were to manage to get in, for instance, d4, that bishop is completely trapped. I can also threaten to win it by playing either f3 or h3 followed by g4. Again, he has no time to get my knight out. He can't, but he'll still escape. He can play e6, right? So I could play here. He could play e6 with the idea of recapturing the bishop with the e-pawn. That's why I'm fixated on e6. That's usually how the anti-color bishop on f5 is defended in these setups. It's usually defended by the e-pawn. Often there's a pawn on d, and white then gets a knight outposted on the e4 square protected by two pawns, not one but two. So pawns in the center are good, pieces in the center are better. Best is a piece in the center that is supported. Why? Because the piece in the center, let's say it was a knight in this case, controls a lot of key squares all across the board in their own position for defensively, and they're highly mobile. A knight in the center, slow, therefore by being in the center it is closer to the action wherever it may be. That's why a knight on the rim is dim, by the way, because it's farther away from the action usually, unless it's there for a specific reason. And that's why a knight on the rim is also grim. It's dim and it's grim. So I'm going to play this. I think it's correct. Let's see if he allows this kind of shenanigans. He is. He's going to play c6. We often see this in a King's Indian setup. I do think delaying the castling is not a good idea. I never like to delay my own castling. As you can see, castled on move 5. That's almost always the move I castle. Because I almost always get my setup unless black absolutely prevents it. Such as playing a type of Benoni. So black would play, say, a Benoni, which is c7, c5 against my first move. So move 1, d4. Black plays c5. Now it's attacking my D pawn. The anti-Benoni, or the way to play the mainline Benoni, is for black to advance, because black has made no effort to stop the D pawn from advancing. So move 2 for white would be D5. But I don't play that way. I stubbornly insist on playing my setup regardless of whether it is the recommended or best optimal way to play against the Benoni. Instead, I play E6 and I defend that. Support the center pawn. So put a pawn in the center and support it. Key opening principle. Then I can't make my same 5 moves if black decides to exchange, because I need to get the material back. So I recapture with my E pawn in the center, but that has the salutary benefit of providing my dark squared bishop with the option of developing along the C1 to H6 diagonal. Again, we're talking about openings that haven't happened. Now, if I take the bishop now, which is the most expeditious way to do it, and there's another kind of reason. I'm a poor calculator, and therefore I don't like to leave a lot of tension on the board. The more tension there is, the more you have to calculate it every single move. You have to look. I have to look at this. I have to consider whether the knight is, because it's unprotected, I have to consider whether the knight is vulnerable here. Yeah, I have to calculate all this. So remove the tension and gain the benefit. You don't, however, you resolve the tension. The question is, when do you resolve the tension? And the answer is as simple as it is difficult. You resolve the tension when resolving it is to your benefit. Resolving the tension here is to my benefit on 2 levels. Number 1, he has to double his pawns, create a weakness on his king side, a half-open file, and disrupt his whole castling program. The whole nature of the position is going to change, and not to his benefit. With his double, he also has an isolated pawn on the H file. He will, however, get a half-open file leading directly to my king side, and he's likely able to occupy that first. But he's got to get his king out of the way if he wants to take full advantage. Plus, I can blunt everything by playing G3. And look, one of the many benefits of having my light square bishop on E2 is the bishop is close to home. I can and do often play a G3, a delayed Catalan, if you will, if you want to think of it that way, because my bishop can cover the light squares. If the light square bishops are traded off, my queen can stay close to home and guard these light squares. G3, always a very distinct possibility for me. I have not playing the bathtub then, but I am playing G3 to blunt the half-open file. If I don't take here, then the question is, why not? Well, one of the reasons is I'm not compelled to do so. So I can leave the tension on the board and address other matters. He has just played C6. A shrewd move in the sense that now my knight is dominated. Notice how a pawn 2 squares away from the knight dominates the knight's jumps. That's always a powerful move. C6 often a very strong defensive move for black. In many openings where white has developed a knight to C5. And I played this move a lot in my black setup, where I also played D6. I play for an early E5, though. That's the difference here. Not the King's Indian. And then I play old Indian style because I'm old school 1.0. I always buy original recipe products off the grocery shelves. My king, sometimes, if there's a central pawn exchange in my D6 system as a result of pawn exchanges in the center against my E, then my king will come to roost on C7. Very strong setup. This knight is going nowhere, and what happens in my D6 system with an early E5 is white finds himself struggling for a plan. C7, key, absolutely key, in many, many positions where I've played D6 likewise. So this is highly endorsed by me. Something I need to pay attention to, and it's important, is the knight can come to the A5 square. You don't see it too often, particularly since the knight is pinning nothing. My king has already fled the roost, castling safely to G. Just put that as another check mark to my opening system. Yeah, we're seeing my opening system strengths. Now, people poo-poo this bishop to e3. They said you got to put the bishop on d3, more active square. Don't poo-poo my opening. Don't poo-poo my opening. Black is not going to beat me in the first 20 moves. It's just not going to happen. It's Wally the 1800. We will eventually get up to the higher rated bots. Hopefully I'll knock Wally off today, and then we'll be facing the third and final of the 1800 Silicon Monsters. Wally's not going to beat me in the opening. That's just a fact. Now, I might not get a big advantage out of the opening. In fact, I'm almost certainly liable not to. But I'm not going to get swept off the board. I'm playing according to opening principles. I'm doing nothing particularly wrong. I'm not presenting a target to my opponent. I'm not weakening my own position. I'm not taking risks. If black plays symmetrically, I found in this system that I have here, white gets really no advantage whatsoever, or very, very, very slender sliver of advantage. If white decides to play some of these hyper-modern things, and they most often do, like King's Indian, this position all of a sudden becomes very dynamic. This position we're looking at right now is very unbalanced. A. B. All the pawns and all the pieces are still on the board. That means I have lots and lots of artistic material with which to create. We have not seen wholesale exchanges of pieces like sometimes you see in the Petrov, where there is the e-pawns are off the board and there's a big wholesale exchange of pieces on the e-file. We're not seeing any of that. So if you want to keep your winning chances alive, despite the fact that you're not going to come out of the opening with a big edge, you can outplay your opponent in the middle game, especially if he doesn't go symmetrical, especially if he breaks the symmetry. Black players often do. They're impatient. Like I said earlier in the video, about 75% of all chess players like to attack. They want to put their pieces in aggressive squares. Wally, however, let's not forget, Wally from Scotland, the 1800 rated bot on chess.com, is allegedly, according to the copywritten text, an endgame specialist. That's fine because I consider myself a little bit of an endgame specialist despite my inability to calculate, and you may beg to differ when you look at my game from yesterday if you do. The whole 2 hours and 48 minutes of it. And this game is on its way to being a 2 hour and 48 minuter because I'm just running my mouth here. Like, okay. So, immediate capture here may be in order. If black were to put the queen on a5 during the next move, now he could recapture with the queen. Really kind of doubtful though, because the queen can be harassed to a high degree on that f5 squares. Let's calculate it a little bit. Let's say I play b3, then the queen comes out. Now it's defending the bishop and the loose knight, so that's an issue. It doesn't happen often in my opening system, but there are times when the dark square bishop for white is better positioned on d2, and it's when there's activity happening over here. Black almost always has to initiate play on the queen side in such a way that moving my dark squared bishop to d2 is the best move, because if there is no justification, the black bishop is by far stronger on the long dark squared diagonal, by far. So black has to kind of just make me justify putting my bishop here, and a queen to a5 would justify probably me moving my bishop from c1 to d2. That does inhibit my queen. My queen can come out to b3. She's starting to venture a little far from the king side. I have gotten in trouble before, but again, remember the b pawn is a bit of a weakness. Because he played c6, now his king really doesn't have, strictly speaking, a long-term safe house to retreat to, because the pawn shields are moving away on both sides of the board. That again suggests knight takes bishop from a positional standpoint might be good. I don't think black really is ever going to play this. It would be somewhat annoying. I don't want to put my bishop on b2. I'd rather bring it to the long dark square diagonal and begin to blunt this monster. Once I move b3, the only other move is this. b4 definitely prevents and cuts off queen to a5. I'm worried. I'm really having a lot of anxiety about a move that's probably no good, queen to a5. Queen coming to a5, though, would prepare queenside castling. And despite the pawn being on c6 and one on d6, it's not like I'm going to start attacking right away, although that does queenside castle directly into the teeth of things. After I move b4, which I think what I'm going to do is, he still hasn't dealt with this particular problem. I think e6 would have been the better way to deal with it. Notice when you exchange pieces, you're not losing time. So if I do play knight takes bishop, he's forced to return the material to equality by recapturing the knight by playing g takes f. And then I get in b4 anyway. You could try something like this. I can support the b pawn and so on. So I'm going to take, I think from a positional standpoint, my trumps are too high. I now have to be wary of the fact that there is a road to victory on the half-open g-file leading directly to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, my king. That could backfire on him. I could go king h1 at some point and rook g1, assuming this pawn is gone. So just because he's the first to the file doesn't necessarily mean in the long term he's going to be the one that controls it. There's a nice stubby little weakness here on f7 that I could get pressure on now. Of course, he could take off my own light squared bishop. Then the queen comes, and if he can't easily get to this, if he can't easily defend this pawn, this would be very annoying for him. You may even have to evacuate the rook, and then my queen could infiltrate further. So he has weakened his kingside complex. We're seeing a number of weakened squares. Moves the e-pawn now, the knight. He would weaken the pawn, the f6 square also. There's weak pawns and weak squares on the king side. However, I was playing on the queen side, wasn't I? So the plan was b4. Now queen a5 doesn't make as much sense. He can't swing the queen into action easily along the fifth rank. I'm trying to think, can he have a whirlwind style attack by repositioning his rook to g and the queen to a5. A nuance here also is, remember I was talking about a fianchetto bishop versus a bishop on e2, which is still an area of learning for me and understanding. It's one of the great mysteries of chess to me is the fianchetto dark squared bishop. For the longest time I didn't know how to play against it or with it. I've come to the epiphany. For me, it's an epiphany. For you, it's obvious that when you have a fianchetto bishop, you're playing for the center. Hypermodern. That's why it's hypermodern. You fianchetto the bishop, then you attack the center. When you have a bishop more classically developed on e7, then you're playing more for a flank. Okay, different. That's the difference. The difference is whether you're playing for these four squares or not those four squares. See how the bishop on e7 has nothing now to do with the center, but does have everything to do with the flanks? And do you see how this bishop has nothing to do, at least with the king side flank, and only a limited amount to do with the queen side if the center is a strong point? The question is now, should I attack this right away? One of the many benefits I get now, despite, in addition to all the weaknesses that have been caused by the shattering of pawn's king side, is Now I can put my queen on c2, and I can do so with a tempo against this loose f pawn. The queen on c2 defending the knight against trades. That's often the way I will defend this knight. The queen on c2 doing the more important work of allowing me to eventually connect my rooks. The queen on c2 will also defend my bishop on b2. Even if I fianchetto my dark square bishop to b2, there's another critical difference in the position versus my dark squared bishop and black's dark squared bishop. The difference is black is normally castled and not gone for this nonsense. And the king on the king side defends the king side fianchetto. I fianchettoed on the queen side. My queen often busy running errands to the grocery store looking for it to attack, like she should be doing. And this bishop is loose. Defended bishop, loose bishop. Tactics abound, ladies and gentlemen. Tactics abound. Queen c2 seems logical. My bishop now doing some work by helping the e pawn defend the f4 square in case black decides to sacrifice the pawn to somehow, I don't know why, but to somehow disrupt my pawn formation instead, maybe to undermine my d pawn. That is a consideration. I put my queen on c2. Now my queen is no longer defending the strong point. I've taken my eyes off the ball. However, black not putting any pressure there yet. I can replace the queen in that work by putting the bishop on f to d1. Okay, and now I'm again defending the d pawn. So queen c2, logical. Let's take advantage of the attack. Now, the bot has thrown up a message. Wally has provided us an electronic message from the perspective of the Silicon Beast, and I am happy to say Wally is complimenting us by saying, quote, "I must admit that I like your position." So we're doing well. We're having a successful opening. Now queen to e5, slight surprise for me. Slight surprise. Queen sometimes e7, a little better, I think, because it would be supporting e7, e5, and the dark squares here, which would make kind of more sense since his bishop is also on that diagonal and he's got a knight. So, this is King's Indian. The King's Indian move is e7, e5. That is the trunk of the biggest branch of most of the King's Indian, I want to say. And some of you Kings are probably throwing wads of paper and popcorn at the screen because c5 is the other break. But e5 was how the King's Indian was played. Got analyzed to death, and the King's Indian players started to develop new ideas, new theory in c5 breaks. All right. Here's the pressure against the knight. So now an open question. I have a number of ways to play against this queen. And I think I might because I want to still develop my queen side. I have not completed my opening. I say an opening is complete when the rooks are connected. And I've not connected my rook yet. I have a still undeveloped dark squared bishop. The e pawn going nowhere since black controls the e4 square quite solidly now with the combination of a knight and pawn. And if I were to play e4, he would trade off his weakness. Now the question becomes, and it's an important one, do I want to play for space on the queen side, the original conception, or do I want to take the fact that black has weakened his king side and that's where I should be attacking? The problem for me is, do you see these three pawns? You attack in the direction your pawns are pointing, and my pawns are pointing towards the heart of black's queen side on a7. My position naturally wants to go student body left, okay? Naturally wants to go that direction. So I want to play on the queen side here. Black, however, has made it so that I must consider, can I switch up to a king side attack? That would require collie moves, and those are possible here. If I'm going to make collie moves, and by that I mean specifically e3, e4 break, then I don't need to develop this dark square bishop yet. I want to reserve the option of developing the dark square bishop after I've played e3, e4. I can now switch to a collie system, a pseudo collie system, delayed collie system, the collie system unaccelerated, by playing bishop on e2 to bishop to d3, adding additional pressure to this f pawn so it comes with tempo. Now I am definitely threatening to play e4 because my knight supports that advance, my queen supports that advance, and my bishop supports my advance. And then moreover, white cannot fight for the e4 square with his light squared bishop. We've exchanged that off. Plus, and here comes a lot of the added benefit, e4 with added benefits. My rook, after I move to bishop d3, my rook on f can come to e1, and looky, hello, black king. You're not going to castle, fine, I'll bust the center open. That's how Russian schoolboys are taught to play chess. If he doesn't castle, bust the center open and checkmate him. On the open board. I'll checkmate your king right in the center of the board, pal. Right in the center of the board. You hear me, Wally? And I have done that to some of these lower rated bots. They've made the same mistake over and over. They have not seen to king's safety, and I busted open the center and punished them severely. Right now I'm giving the chess lessons against these lower rated bots. As I've said to you before, when I start playing the higher rated bots, I will go from giving chess lessons to being the chess lesson. I'm very attracted to this idea. For that reason, I might not want to touch my b pawn. It's guarding the c3 knight. As soon as I move my b pawn, then I have to look to defending this knight for a variety of reasons now. Queen and bishop intersecting with a possible break against my center. This knight can become a little dicey. Notice the knight's future was greatly inhibited when black played c6. Now I can't push my knight into the enemy position where it wants to be. I can't post it up. But the knight still can play and support this move. In fact, could I play this move immediately? Let's take a look tactically at that. So I play move immediately, takes, my queen comes to e4. Look at that. We've done some actual calculation, really for the first time. The queen has an open a5 e1, but my rook is not on e1, so there's no tactical. That's something now I'm going to have to be aware of. My rook wants to come to the center, but because he's not connected to the other rook yet, I haven't completed my development. There's a tactical problem when this knight moves. Queen annoying on a5, a little more annoying than I thought it would be. I believe she was completely off sides. But let's see how black handles it when I put my bishop on d3. Another issue I need to keep in mind is black has, as compensation for the double pawns on the king side, black has gained the compensation of a half-open file leading directly to my king, and the possibility of a king side attack that ensues. I have lost, or exchanged off, more precisely, the key defender of my king side, which is my knight on f3. My other knight, because it is hopped to b3 instead of d2, like you would see in the collie, can't replace my knight on f3. So the defense of my king now comes down to the pawns and this light squared bishop, and my queen has also sort of vacated the premises, although she is providing important structural support to my second rank. And you're probably wondering, like, what is he talking about with this, all this kind of stuff in the ether, positions that don't exist. I've played this hundreds of times. And I'm getting a very strong spider sense about where my pieces belong. I'm going to be curious to see what the computer evaluation thinks about my opening. Sometimes it doesn't like my move. Typically, it hates this move. It even says I'm out of book when I move my bishop to e2. And the insights on chess.com, there's an insights feature where you get a lot of statistical, in-depth breakdown of your style of chess, whether the game was wild or sudden or calm, how good were the moves for each one of your pieces, broken down to accuracy. So, like, I moved my queen at 89%, and I moved my bishops at 92%, and so on. And I forgot what I was going to say. Boy, I'm getting tired. What a ramble this has been. I got to think now. Comes with tempo. Not really doing anything about this yet. With the queen on a5, there's some problems black may have with trying to pawn break. Pawn breaks are where you get initiative from. The side with the pawn breaks controls the initiative, generally speaking. And I have the most important pawn break on the board. e3 for e4. He has a very important one also with the d pawn, because it puts a pawn on a key square, but that deprives the knight. And I could just block everything down. Now he's got a semi-backward pawn here. He could attack the head of my pawn. Okay, so let's just move. Okay, just move. The only other thing is, do I dislodge this queen before I begin this nonsense? Just for the sake of being able to get my rook to e1 without being harassed. If I play a3 with the idea of playing b4, again, I'm tethered to this. I might have to move my rook. There's also move the bishop here in anticipation of playing. This might be the move then. It's deep, but it might be the move. If I put my bishop on d2, now I have the possibility of discovery against the black queen. My c3 knight can move away, even capturing material, and unmask this attack, and the bishop is covered by my queen along the second rank. That's benefit 1. Benefit 2, I can put my rook on e1, because now I control the important e1 to a5 diagonal. Benefit 3, I can put my bishop on d3 and my rook on e1, and I'm not stepping on my own toes. Every piece is working together. Con, of course, the knight on c3 is not going to be backed up by my dark squared bishop on the long diagonal, and more importantly, I'm not going to oppose this piece. His problem is the dark squared bishop is blocking his half-open file. He's not going to be able to defend the dark squared bishop with his king, because castling right now onto the king side would be suicidal. And this bishop actually becomes a target because it's not defended by any pieces. I'm going to play here. I think this is the correct move, believe it or not. I believe I have time for all this. And Wally has now officially committed suicide. This is just crazy. This is crazy chess. He has, in fact, developed his king to a situation where his pawn shield has been shattered. In effect, castling behind a broken shield. However, he does have a lot of pieces around his king. So let's not pretend he's losing immediately. That's not necessarily a losing move. He has connected his rooks. He's one move behind me in that regard. I connected my rooks on move 11 with bishop d2. He's connected his rooks now by double O castles on move 11. He could be trying to get queenside play. My position very solid. I'm ready to play on both flanks. My bishops are on the flank attack squares. And I'm also preparing action in the center. I think I'm really dominating the position at this time. The collie, since I'm playing an unaccelerated collie or delayed collie, the collie is custom designed to whip up a kingside attack. The rook, when it comes to e1, now has a potential weakness on e7 to look at because that pawn is undeveloped. But perhaps more important, can be lifted to the e3 square and brought into the attack on the king side. I have ready-made targets in the h-pawn, protected only by the glorified pawn on g7, also known as black's bishop. Yeah, I think black's in trouble. Do I have any good knight discovery? So let's calculate this. Black is going to have to start calculating this too. Unfortunately for black, black calculates at the speed of light, so it's no worry for him. I calculate at the speed of a hamster running on a wheel because that's what goes on in my mind half the time. So now bishop comes to d3. It's with tempo. He's going to have to do something about that pawn. He can advance his e-pawn. He's weakening the dark squares when he does that. We've talked about how all the weak squares now he has over on the king side do his shattered pawn formation. However, that does address the issue of a potential target on the e-file. Then I play e4. He can try to sidestep, but my bishop, do you see how that? My bishop, rather, instead of being on the long dark square diagonal, is providing additional support to the e pawn on f4, and when the pawn leaves, the bishop takes over that duty. So he can't move the target without losing a pawn. So let's calculate it now. Well, let's not calculate. Let's instead get the bishop to an active square, staring at h7 as the collie bishop does. Usually there's a pawn there and therefore something to gobble up, but there is a kind of a check. That could become an accelerator move, getting the bishop out of the way of the queen that will also follow up. I get 2, 3. If I can get my pieces organized and attacking this king, it could be curtains for him. He did play e6. I believe that's the correct response. Now we're going to bust things. The king no longer in the center. Let's calculate it just slightly before I do it. It's what I've been playing for. We've been talking about it. The moment has finally arrived, chess fans. e4. F takes e. Bishop takes e. Queen under threat, probably has to move. Could come over to the king side, not impossible. Then we have sort of a standoff on the king side where black may try to counterattack. The king would want to get out of the way, probably moving to h8, and he would have the rooks connected, which was part of his problem on the open, half open G file. It's a little too edged then. It's a little too edged. Can I take care of this queen now, get her off? Is she better or worse if I force her to retreat to say c7 or d8? On d8, she's cutting the communication between the rooks that could blunt activity down the half open G file when he moves his king out of the way. When Wally does if and when Wally puts his king on h8, I just want to point out that this construction, a bishop on g7 and a king on h8, and the similar constructions in any corner where there's a king and a bishop, cat corner to the king, it's stronger than you think and harder to attack, and then it looks. You think the king is wide open, but he's not. The bishop, a very good shield to the king. I'm finding that defensively. I've played several games now where either I or my opponent has been in a situation where the king appeared to be exposed, but had a bishop directly counter to it, catty corner to it, and it's stronger defensive than I thought. Here. Now, there's also the possibility to just take it with the white bishop. Then knight takes. Once this knight is gone, the other knight can step up, and I've relieved a bit of the black's cramp. This is why I'm not necessarily going to rush into e3, e4, sports fans. Another reason why not to rush into it is I no longer have a target on the e file. So it's not coming with a lot of... It looks very spectacular, does it not? And that's probably the computer's first move. However, he's going to liquidate a double pawn weakness. He is going to exchange off a piece, relieving his cramp. He's going to get his c6 knight. He's going to get it back onto the c6 square with a knight, a key defensive square defending h7. A knight around the king, the strongest defense, I think. So you have these three pieces around the king. I'm going to have to outnumber him with my pieces around the king. Not clear how to do that just yet. I do have a free knight move. Move your knight for free. So this is not something I'd looked at before, but what if I did something wild, like just put my knight on d5? Now the queen has to move. I can come here, check, even wilder. But there's no real fork that way. Suppose I try the same thing and I come here. Look, now I'm forking the rook, but it can just move away, and my knight trapped behind any lines dies. There's also knight here, and now I'm attacking this square. So let's look at that. I wonder how long this has been on the board. Knight goes to e5. We're going to have to calculate it. I'm threatening the undefended d6 pawn, which became undefended when black moved his e pawn to e6. Yes, I play d6 against everything, and I'm very familiar with the d6 pawn being either backward or undefended. The d6 pawn can become a target. So almost certainly then he'll retreat the queen to c7, a square arguably she might have wanted to be on before. My knight now would be threatened with capture and has to make another move. And exchanging for his knight, I think, just helps black by alleviating the ill effects of the cramp. The strength of this construction, two knights in an L shape from each other, the strength of this construction is the knights guard each other very well, and you have defended pieces. So loose pieces are not going to drop off. The disadvantage is a concept I first heard articulated by Grandmaster Irina Krush, one of my favorite chess players, one of the most respected chess players, I think, in American chess. Certainly almost a living legend. Not quite their arena yet, but you're getting there. You're almost a living legend. She said that when look at all these pieces. She said that they're all fighting for the same square. Anatoly Karpov, when he was learning chess, advised not to rote memorize chess axioms in a book, but to invent your own. And I remembered Irina invented at that moment a sort of an insight that all these pieces are fighting for the same square, and you don't want all your pieces fighting for the same square. There can be only one. You want all your pieces on good squares. It's just as an easy game. Just as an easy game. All you have to do is put your pieces on good squares. It's that simple. Okay. You don't want all your pieces fighting for a single good square. And is this square really so good? Because it's supported only by the bishop. Real tricky question whether I want this queen on a5 or do I try to gain space. I have all the positional trumps right now. I'm threatening e4. Black has a wide range of breaks. The problem I'm having experience now here in the middle game is complexity. All I have to do is overlook some sort of tactical nuance or positional nuance, and black could start to recover from what is, I think, clearly a bad position, which suggests the way for me to play personally is to just get the break in, get the tension relieved, and then move on .org to the next. When I'm left with a piece on e4 after all the exchanges, now he can play d5 with some oomph. I don't like the fact this queen is posted on the edge of on my border. I really don't like that. I don't like the fact that she can swing to the king side, which will either help with the defense or contribute to an attack, especially with my knight gone from f3. This seems really slow. a3, not muscular at all. The muscular move, the flex, is e3, e4 now. Maybe even have to put in a rook behind it. Further, though, moving pieces away from my king. No longer defending the f2 pawn. That's not really a problem at the moment because black can't put pressure down the f file due to his double pawns. I don't want to play here yet. I'm liquidating. I'm addressing two of black's major problems: the double pawns and the fight. The squabble the black pieces are having for who gets to sit. Musical chairs. You don't want to play musical chairs with your pieces. You don't want to have 3 pieces in 2 squares, or even worse, 3 pieces in 1 square. I'm also, when I move e3, e4, I'm no longer defending the d pawn. And look, right there at the head, in the middle of my front lines, right on the border, the d pawn is undefended and in the sights of the dark square bishop. I hadn't really noticed that until just now. So if exchanges do occur here at the end of it, yeah, that's kind of a problem. In a regular collie, what happens is white will liquidate this pawn because black usually has a pawn on c5. Black will play d takes c5 to liquidate this potential weakness. Then the e-pawn moves. Since the e-pawn no longer necessary to defend the d-pawn who is left. Then there's an exchange, wholesale exchange in the center. Then white either proceeds with a kingside attack or white has a queenside pawn majority. Because remember, the c pawn and the d pawn have exchanged each other. So that the c pawn is missing. So it's 3 against 2. These 3 pawns against these 2. Creating the possibility for an outside pass pawn when the kings are castled kingside, and therefore that is an advantage, gives winning chances. I'm not going to play this until I figure out what I want to do with that. You understand? There's going to be, I'm sorry, the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. You're now free to move about the cabin. I'm going to continue to defend my strong point against this dark squared bishop, and I will develop my queenside further. Queen back, c7 might have been a little better. Again, now 3 pieces, 3 minor pieces and 1 heavy piece. The queen is battling to land on the f6 square. The natural follow-up move would be b4. By my capture in the position, I get 2 pawns for the bishop, but no real way to follow up, especially with my e-pawn still clogging the way. One of the issues with moving my bishop to d3, it looked pretty at the time, was now I can't provide vertical support to my e4 pawn. We're going to take space. I got to be really careful now. He's going to come back. Not a big challenge because my rooks are connected. I am ready to fight for the a file. An additional benefit is if we're going to fight on the queen side, these static weaknesses remain until the end game. So it might be my king beat is the one that finally takes advantage of this targeted h pawn, clearing the way for a coronation on the h8 square for Henry here, or Harry. I played a chess player in a coffee house chess in college, literally at a coffee house. He called Harry is what Grandmaster Simon calls the H pawn. He popularized it, and Simon was actually playing the alpha 0 move H2 H4 before there was an alpha 0. He recognized, the Ginger GM recognized the power of the H pawn. He calls it Harry the H pawn. Sometimes players do name their pawns. So the D pawn would be Doug. I read a book about the Grunfeld, not a defense I incorporate, but the author of the book had given a name to the pawn, the key pawn in the Grunfeld. I forget which one it was. I think it was the D pawn. And talked about how the whole game centers on the D pawn. So he named the pawn. All right, so A7, A5 has been played. Tension has been arrived on the board between the B and A pawns on our two sides respectively. I can capture. Now a rook comes to A5. Again, I get a free knight move because of a discovery. This pawn sitting now, so I might have an opportunity to grab a pawn. And I am a member, a card-carrying member of Pawn Grammars Anonymous. So let's look at this discovery a little closer. Pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn. So far, nothing to write home about, other than the A file is half open for black. And I've half opened the B file to bring maybe my F rook over to. Okay, so we will write home about that. We will send a postcard. B takes A, rook takes A. But then, ooh, doggies, I do a move like knight to B5. The point is now I have attacked the rook. Black takes the knight. I win the exchange on the rook. Then the queen cleans up and takes my second piece. So now I've traded a knight and a bishop for a rook and a pawn. Plus he has these double pawns on the B file, which is open. I can attack it frontally. Plus, he's not well equipped to deal with a weakness on his queen side of double pawns. We're seeing a lot of arrows, but it's actually more playable than I thought. By giving up my minor pieces, I'm also experiencing a sort of cramp by the fact that I can't play E3, E4 easily without really taking a lot of risk on my D pawn. Which would be undefended at that point. Now we're seeing the downside of putting my bishop on D2. If my bishop were on B2, it would be providing support either explicitly or implicitly to my D pawn along the dark square diagonal, but it's not. My bishop here is here on D2. not addressing the center squares. We talked about this. Did we not talk about this? We talked about the difference between a fiend shadowed bishop on b2 and a dark square bishop developed to the d2 square. The differences, the important and salient differences that every chess player must consider. So I kind of like this idea. Remember, we relieve tension when it's to our benefit. The reason why is because he's going to end up with a pawn here. So let's go through it again a little more carefully. Pawn takes pawn. I'm up a pawn materially. To redress the balance, well, he could always come back with the queen and take it. Now, a discovered attack against the queen would not have the same... Well, it would, because the queen cannot defend this pawn. The d6 pawn. The point of all this is my d pawn is protected very carefully by my e pawn. I aborted my plan when I realized to my horror my d pawn would be too vulnerable. But his d pawn is vulnerable. He's moved c6. He's moved e6, and the pawn on d6 is undefended. And additionally, because he's stepping on his toes, and because he's moved his bishop away, this pawn is undeveloped. This d6 pawn is the target. Takes, so let's say he goes with the queen. Now I go here. The queen cannot defend that pawn by moving to c7. That pawn is going to drop. Then my knight, okay, the problem is my knight is well behind enemy lines on the 6th rank. But I can protect it by playing my c pawn to c5, protecting the knight when it arrives here. The issue is I'm really opening the dark square diagonal for black's monster bishop on g7. That is also a hindrance for playing on the side of the board. But if my a pawn remains and is defended, then I'm going to actually find the b file, my source of counterplay, and then this bishop is striking at airy nothing, as the old chess masters used to say. So I take now, let's say the rook takes, knight here, he takes the knight, I have a pawn here, I take the rook, the queen takes the rook, I do have, ladies and gentlemen, a pawn on c4, let's not forget, I could take the pawn, it's supported by my bishop on d3, because remember I have this nice, okay, I'm going to play this feels right. This feels right. We're going to find out. Okay. Either black has agreed with me or the Silicon Beast has had a short circuit. Now he's defending the d6 pawn. I didn't consider this alternative at all. Now rook takes pawn, very much in the cards for him. I can allow this and start my play on the b file, or I can defend the pawn I just won. And there's a nice little hole here on b6. Knight goes to a4. Knight on the rim is dim, knight on the rim is grim, but I have a specific reason, and that's because I'm headed to b6. Yes, he can exchange that knight off. He has ready-made defense for the b6 square. It is guarded. But then I undouble my pawns, and I've got a very powerful pawn deep in his position on b6 that I can easily support with my heavy pieces or by bringing up my a pawn, which is backed by my rook. All the time, though, this bishop is sitting out here with potential breaks coming. I think this is the move then. I'm having trouble in this middle game due to the complexity. This move seems multi-purpose. Typically multi-purpose moves are better moves that are good for just one reason. We could call this a threat, I suppose. So moves that make a threat, it's a positional threat. So moves that make a threat are usually the strongest moves. And I am defending my a5 pawn, which gives this dark squared bishop justification. Not only a job, but actual justification for being on the d2 square. Imagine that. The original justification was tactical play against the a5 square when the queen was there. So let's do this. Okay, let's see. Let's look at all the captures in the position. He has rook takes pawn. I think that's the only one. That's the only material capture. Nothing else is really, that's a problem for him. He's not threatening anything directly right now. There are potential breaks. There's too many for me to calculate. I'm just going to have to rely on the fact that my position is solid, and it's likely that any one of these breaks is not good or can be ignored. I've done nothing wrong at all. I've connected my rooks. My pieces are in reasonable squares. I do have some issues. Black has more. Here we go. Knight also protected just in case. It could play. Okay, then now comes a break. Problem for him. Big one. He's weak in the dark squares. I have all kinds of moves. One is reposition my bishop to b4. It comes with a tempo by threatening to win the exchange against his rook on f8. That's one. Number two, advance my c pawn to c5, continuing operations on the queen side, which was always the plan A, since it turned out that e3, e4 was not what I wanted to do. Notice e3, e4 now definitely off the cards, but you know what? I'd already given up on that idea. I realized this wasn't a threat unless I was willing to risk or sacrifice my d-pawn. He will play this break. I can get my bishop to c3 now easily, which masks my rook on a1, where he continues to have a good old nap. By moving the pawn to c5, I have really now buckled down on the b6 square. Totally buckled down. Then comes knight to b6. If he exchanges off, I'll capture towards the center with my a pawn. Then my other a pawn, the a3, will come up, dig out the base, and look, the pawn on b6 will become a protected pass pawn. Virtually an unstoppable force. He does have here, okay, we didn't look at that initially because the pawn was on d6. That was the target originally. The target is moved, as often happens in chess. You're trying to hit moving targets. My traditional h2 pawn is now subject to the potentialities of an attack. He can play knight to g4. The knight and the queen, powerful attacking combination because they complement each other so well. In my system, I play this a lot. I have a couple of antidotes. Antidotes. One is now might be the time to play, or soon, the move h3. That will prevent his knight from coming to g4. It does weaken my g-pawn a little bit, because if my g-pawn ever goes to g3, the pawn on h3 could be hanging, and the pawn on g3 is only defended now by the f-pawn. Another anecdote that I've done is shutting down the dark squares by moving f2, f4. That tends to be a little more double-edged than even h3. If his knight comes to g4, h3 is no good anymore, because even though I've moved the target, it's the square, not the pawn, that matters, and that's checkmate. Mate in one, always good. In other words, knight to g4 is going to be a good move for him. The knight on g4 opens the path for the other knight, if needed, to come to f6. Now we're getting a little esoteric. It's not clear whether that knight should leave the queen side, considering the potential emergency that's happening for black on the queen side. I'm going to need like a precise move. A way not to lose time, per se. He's going to play this no matter what, right? Is to capture, and I haven't thought about that yet. If I capture here, he can capture with the knight. That would be very strong for him. That would be very strong, particularly since I wouldn't be able to kick. I can't allow this knight. I have problems against knights. I have big problems against knights. They post up on my side of the board. They get defended by a pawn, and then they give me fits. I try to play around them, and it never works. And I'm getting myself into trouble. And I lost my traumatic game against Lorenzo, the 1600 rated bot. I believe his name is Lorenzo. It's precisely due to knight play. It is my weakness. It is my kryptonite. Let's suppose I play c5, which I believe is the move that I need to play. It prevents black from posting a knight in the center. Remember, a pawn in the center is good. A supported pawn in the center is better. A piece in the center is better still, and a supported piece in the center is best, generally. We'll play here, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. Okay, he's going to come instead to the center of the board on e4. My e4, he's posted on my side. There's a little bit of just a whiff of desperation behind that move. We're going to look now at every potential move jump this knight has. Dark squared bishop he can capture. That capture is not great for him. It does undermine the defense of my a5 pawn, but my queen will recapture, and my queen will do the work of the bishop until I get my knight to b6. And if there's an exchange, he could try to double. So what could happen is he takes, my queen takes. Now I'm guarding this pawn. The queen could try to come here to attack, but if my knight comes to b6, then the rook's got to move off at a8, and if he tries to take my knight off with his knight, then I could liquidate that potential weakness on a5 by recapturing on the b6 square. Also, let's just say I lose this. Somehow I haven't calculated everything properly, and I do lose the a5 pawn. Still not the end of the world. It's not a consequential pawn. I'm on pawn up, just giving back the material, and I could use that time to start operation down the b file. This is going to be a real problem for him. So much so that it might even be better not to plant my knight into b6 right away, and instead just get the frontal attack going. I could even double rooks on the b file and really start to crimp down. But the problem is the posted knight, and if I ignore it and try to continue to play on the king side, well, things could go bad. If he undermines my d pawn, he could start counterattacking. So my position a little more fragile than it would suggest with this strong pawn chain. Because if he can start to undermine it, he could come from behind, so to speak. By moving his knight to the roost on e4, yes, it's the center knight. We agree. No one's going to argue with that. But he has given up the mate in one, which means he could have provoked, and probably should have tried to provoke f4 first to shut down this diagonal. Then probably would have had to retreat that knight. But now he could have put it on e4
and I wouldn't have been able to kick it with f3. Point. That's the point. What's the point, Max? This is going to be another 2 hour and 48 minuter at this rate. The point is, and I believe we did speak about it earlier in this game. I'm forgetting now what I spoke about because I've talked about everything under the sun. I did talk about f3 being a common defensive resource. And do you remember when I also mentioned my queen on c2 provides support around the second rank? Do you see how that becomes more important if I make a move like f3? Because if the g-pawn, which has been slightly weakened by the move f3, it doesn't have the same support for advancing. Now it has to rely on the h-pawn. Instead of having two buddies, it has one. Okay, it comes backwards and only has one buddy instead of these two. The two buddies being h and f. But my queen provides a measure of safety. I also want to look at, all right, he's planted a queen on an excellent square. I mean, a knight on an excellent square. It's on a central square. It's where he should be putting his knights if possible. Again, I'm really surprised he didn't play for mate in 1-0 was good. That's a GM Sokolowski said that during a broadcast once. They were doing a game where there was a lot of mate in ones showing up on the board, and GM Sokolowski said, you know what, all these mate in one moves are really good, and he made up a principle just like Irina Krush did. He made up his own principle and said mate in 1 always good. That it's never a bad move if you threaten mate in 1. Not because necessarily it leads to checkmate, but it typically leads to your opponent having to react in such an extreme fashion that you gain an advantage. What if I exchange the light squared bishop for his knight? So, as always, if there's going to be an exchange for equal material or ostensibly equal material, I'm giving up, quote, the advantage of the two bishops. The advantage of the two bishops is non-existent right now due to the fact that both my bishops are hemmed in, except they are highly operational on the queen side. Highly operational. I am going to want to try to advance a pawn to a6 where it be supported by my light squared bishop. In addition, my light squared bishop, once the f pawn leaves, can come back and provide support to my g pawn, relieving my queen from that duty if I move f3. So that all suggests f3 might be the best move here. Not bishop takes knight. But if I do bishop takes knight, no longer have the quote-unquote advantage of the bishop here, which may or may not have been an advantage in this close position. Black will continue to have doubled pawns, and he can either have doubled pawns, he does have e5 is coming. e5 is coming, and therefore I want to keep this dark squared bishop. So if I play f3 and he takes it off, and he plays e5, do you see he's got the pawn breaks is where the initiative comes from. He now has the most immediate and strongest pawn break on the board, supported by his queen, his knight, and his bishop. He can push e6, e5, leveraging the fact that his dark squared bishop is unopposed on the long diagonal, especially if he exchanges the knight for this bishop. All that suggests getting rid of this knight may be the best thing. Then I don't have to worry about a knight in my position, and his other knight is still far from the action. Though the other knight could come for the mate in 1. I will have time then to play h3. Yeah, I'm thinking just get rid of this knight, relieve the tension. The advantage I get is I've removed his best minor piece. It currently has now overtaken his dark squared bishop as his best minor piece because it is posted in the center where the knight wants to be. Every knight dreams of an outpost in the center or on the 6th rank. Or knight f5 is another deadly one. It's called knife f5. Is one of the chess players has said. I think GM Ben Feingold calls it knife f5. I take the pony. f3, my dark squared bishop comes off, and he commences operations on the dark squares. Actually, kind of serious. Okay, so f3, my dark square bishop comes off. Attacking this doesn't work because I have knight b6. But he will probably counterattack in the center. That's the way you respond to a flank attack, is you attack in the center. If he does counter the attack, I said I could try to play a tricky move. Well, no, I'll take it, right? Then he'll come with either the knight or the bishop. Then I play f5. If he came with the bishop, though, boom, it's a double attack. If he gets his bishop on this square after an exchange of pawns, he has a double attack due to the queen battery against h2, my h7, or sorry, h2, yes, it is h2, my traditional weakness, and against the rook, which has always been in danger. I don't know when we started talking about this, maybe as early as move 3, g6, but definitely on move 7, bishop g7, we were probably talking about how the game can revolve around black's dark squared bishop on the fianchetto. He gains so much power in the center, he loses flank opportunities, but the center is where the action is. I'm going to exchange this off. I'm going to keep my dark square bishop to just specifically for the defense of my d pawn, which is holding my position together and blunting this bishop. This is the strong point. We're going to continue to defend the strong point. Also, I don't lose time. Anything else would have lost time. He has captured, now his double pawn on the f file has become a supported pawn on e4, and as an added bonus, it can be easily, the double pawns can now be easily liquidated. I think he's solved some of his problems. I have time now, plenty of time to play h3 if he decides to proceed against my king side. I can attack his center. It's actually not a bad move at all. f3, very playable in this position, because if I exchange, if I relieve the tension, then the benefit I get is double pawns on e. So if I play f, he cannot capture, or I mean he can't sit. He's going to be forced to capture, liquidating his double pawns, but bringing my rook to f3, pretty strong square given the fact that his king is sitting on a half open file. That's all very good, but I want to resolve this first, okay? And by preserving my dark squared bishop, I'm also protecting this a5 pawn. So maybe it's still not an emergency to get my rook and my knight into b6, but I do want, this knight is doing nothing right now. It's doing nothing right now. I want to get my knight going. Let's get my knight into the outpost. If he exchanges, and he might, now he no longer has mate in 1, always good. And okay, I could take this way or this way. If I take with my c pawn, which is the sketchy plan, a6 never really in the cards because I've traded off my light squared bishop. So a6 not going to be something that happens soon. But if I capture this way, now I have a pawn majority. You can see I have on the queen side I have a pawn majority. There's your queen side. I boxed it in for you. Not that you needed that. But I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pawns on the queen side, and he has 1, 2, 3. Remember, I'm materially up the equivalent of a pawn. which means we're equal on the king's side, and he has doublers. But as we've already talked about, he can easily liquidate the doubler. I have, however, preserved my dark square bishop from the menace of his knight on e4 by exchanging off the other bishop. Bishops can't protect each other that way against knights. Now the fight is going to be over these dark squares, and I can do a grand fianchetto, the grandest fianchetto of them all, which is instead of putting the bishop on b2, I can put it on c3, and that's almost certainly what I'll do. He can come down, he can add some pressure, I can defend it. He can't come down right now, though, because queen takes, and I'll get a pawn there first, defended by my queen and my rook. I want to keep the rook on A because it's behind my lead pawn. Whenever you have a pawn majority, 4-3, whenever you have this pawn majority, let's do a different color just to change things up. I have 4 red against his 3 blue. It's red against blue, just like in the military. You want to lead with the pawn that has the path to coronation. My pawn to path with coronation is not leading in this case and will have to be brought up. But when it does, it arrives with makes a grand entrance on the a6 square, because if and when black loses the base of his pawn chain on b7, Nimzovich always says, look, Nimzovich talks a lot about pawn chains. Says pawns are free but everywhere born in chains, something like that, or born free but everywhere found in chains. Pawns are born free but everywhere found in chains. I think this is famous literary. If you haven't read My System by Nimzovich, the chess teachings themselves are a little suspect. GM Yazir Saruman hates Nimzovich's teachings, but the book itself is a literary masterpiece. I enjoyed Nimzovich's systems so much when I studied it. Going bishop c3, the grand fianchetto. I'm going to fight for the dark squares. I can either take with the pawn or the bishop. When I moved bishop c3, I didn't talk about it, but I really wanted to replace the pawn with the bishop. Now I have direct opposition of his dark square diagonal, and instead of the bishop being on b2 and potentially unprotected, now my bishop is protected by a pawn. The bishop also becomes, humorously enough, a grand pawn. And then I can really force the exchange if I want to by putting my queen on c3. So bishop takes pawn, queen to c3. Now I'm virtually forcing these dark square bishops off, particularly since he can't flee and is defended only by the king. If I take pawn, though, I should look at that, okay? Because now my bishop has a pathway in past the pawn chain if he wants, and he has a very important square on f4 because that is the projected coronation square. Remember, I want to move my a pawn up, undermine the b pawn, either sacrifice my a pawn or force an exchange on the a6 square of even exchange. Being able to move my bishop to f4 might be a game winner, but I don't want to be tethered to a backwards pawn under the baleful gaze of black's dark squared bishop. We're going to go this way. He could exchange, and he does, and I think that might be the right thing. Now, of course, I have to reform my pawn chain thusly to maintain my material advantage. He's finally coming off the half-open G-file. It might be too little too late. I can play f3 and immediately start here, or I can begin my advance. Or I can bring my queen to the third rank, no longer protecting my pawns on the second, but having protecting the pawns now on the third and getting my queen into an attacking position. I could further then infiltrate my rooks and continue to attack his rather weak king. This H pawn is weak for the endgame. We've discussed all these political nuances. It's no coincidence that we get to discuss these things. The king to h7 has the benefit of not only clearing the g file, which is the first thing we notice, but also defends the h pawn, because I had what I call an accelerator square. If that pawn on h6 were undefended, h6, my queen could have come to d2 to make that threat. He would have had to defend it, and then my queen would have had been able to springboard to another square, potentially. What is important now in this position? Well, I need to get this pawn going. The further I move this pawn, we put rooks behind pawns, because the further your pawn advances, the more squares this rook will gain. I really want this third rank. So a4 seems to make the most sense. He can try a break. It's not really helping him at all. He loses the pawn and develops my rook on f1 at the same time. It would be disastrous. He has problems. I don't really see how he intends to continue. Oh, and he can't even move here. So now, because of this little tactical situation with my queen staring over the head of the pawn on e4, I really want to look at f3. He will have to defend it. He could go as far. Let's just say he moves his queen to defend it and keeps the rook behind the f pawn. More likely he's going to defend it with a pawn. Pawn defense, that's the most likely. So look at the most likely defense. And if the most likely defense is good, then there's no real reason to look at more exotic defenses of his e4 pawn, because he's more likely to play the obvious natural move, defending a pawn with another pawn. A pawn's best friend is another pawn, according to GM Robert Hess, Bobby Hess. There's no chess without Hess. f3. Can't move it, because can't move the target. Threatening. Pawn takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check. Devastating. He defends the e-pawn. I capture the e-pawn with my pawn. He captures back. Now he's got a protected passer, and he has one before I do, before I get my passers going. And there is going to be trades down the f file. Is that going to be enough compensation for him? Probably, because my king will always be stuck to the vicinity of the protected passer. However, I might be able to just leave my king on the e file, or blockading maybe on e3, because this is winning of and by itself. If he gets his king over there in time to prevent me from my plan of coronating my b pawn on b8, my king can never leave, and this weakness means nothing. It'd be 2 on 2. I can't create a pass pawn. Alright, so I don't want to play f3. It's not time for that. We're going to start to create threats. Okay, we're going to start our key threat. Here he comes on the half open. He's on the half open, folks. We got to start looking now every turn at the potential capture, a full rook sacrifice. Rook takes g2, followed up by a check, followed up perhaps by the other rook. There could be shenanigans. Because my queen is on the second rank, I do reserve the opportunity to play f3 if I need to in the last exigency. Rook a3, also move here. That's going to shut him down badly. Now the question is, do I want my pawn advanced past a4? Do I want it on a5? Right now it has the benefit of being protected by the queen, so my a rook can move away. If he tries to he can't put pressure on the a pawn, because look, the queen can't get out to the a file. He could try to the old switcheroo. That's going to take him a lot of time. I have the double weaknesses now. I have 2 weaknesses to work on. Critical pawn break and a weakness on h7. King also a weakness because he is bereft of defense. This pawn is backwards. I don't believe it's a particular weakness now because I can't attack it. Rook a3. We're holding our cards tight to our chest. The queen is now moved off. The b8 square, I'm looking at the potential ramifications. The queen can move all over the board. Very difficult piece to calculate. Could be going for the Neanderthal type play. Easily thwarted now by my rook by moving it to g3. Exchanging. I could put a lot of pressure on him here. Now this threat is even worse. So f to a1, a good plan. Queen, if the queen comes here, she doesn't have any entry points into my position, and that will really kill him. This also might be needed. The sooner I get my pawn ready to play a6, the better. He could blockade, and he will probably blockade at some point with his rook. When he does, that rook is out of the game. Out. You hear me? Out. Out of the game. Though he could bring his queen. I will have to defend it, but I may have more than enough time necessary. If he wants to, he can stop. He can stop my a-pawn by blockading on the 6 square here, or can he? I mean, what if I put the bishop behind the b-pawn? And I even contemplate sacrificing the queen for the rook when it comes to h6. Then push. He could still blockade the coronation square. Not really a plan. Rook to h3, and then followed by queen shifting to the d. Threatens mate. He's going to have to defend that. He has a very strong defense in rook g6. The rook protected on g6. It raises the question, with a rook here and a rook here, he can defend his weaknesses, and a roving queen. He can defend his weaknesses. Another plan, lift the rook. An idea we talked about quite a while ago in conjunction with the Collie system, a lifting rook. This rook is not in the game. It's not defending a pawn that is attacked. I'm kind of overprotecting a pawn that needs no protection at all. My rooks want the mobility. They want the squares. I will have a back rank issue. At that point, I have to be careful of when I evacuate the second rook off my back rank, there could be back rank mates. It could happen, folks. It could happen. You know, he does have squares leading into my position on c1, d1 coming in off the diagonals. You never know what could happen too. He could sacrifice. I think the next thing for me now is continued development. I don't have enough to win yet due to the blockades and piece activity Black has. So I need to match him piece activity for piece activity, and then we can start talking again about my positional trumps. If I play a5 now, it will sort of cement my rook to a3, but I do want to put my queen instead on this open diagonal. My queen doing nothing going against this pawn. I want my queen here staring at the weakness. So I think here that may force rook a6. So let's see what happens when I play. Okay, what would I do against the mate threat? Mate in 1 always good. How am I going to respond to that? I don't want to play f3. Oh, I remember. I'm going to put the rook here, threatening his queen. But remember, I just advanced my pawn. So the rook is gone now, but he'll have to move the queen away. I don't believe he has a potential, this pawn unprotected. Queen needs to be here. The queen needs to be, I need my pawn on a5, 1. I need my queen on d2, protecting my backwards pawn and threatening. And I need my rook lifted or participating by adding to the firepower of the charge of my a pawn down the board, or lifting and coming into the game via the third rank. That suggests to me that actually my best move might be queen d2. Then when he goes for mate and 1, see, this pawn is unprotected at that point. When he goes for mate and 1, I can't leave this pawn unprotected because my plan is to block. Let's look to it. Check. Check. Okay, so remember I talked about this in a little bit of nastiness? Check. My king recaptures. Queen here, check. Forces my king into the corner, only move. Rook to the g file. Now he has a queen on g4 and a rook on g8, the other rook, and he's threatening queen to g8 mate. I do have resources, and this rook can also come. It's a little dangerous. If I put the rook here, then what? Now he's got to move his queen. He can come here, check, and that's all she wrote for me. This is dangerous. This might be exigent. The solution might in fact be g3. Unfortunately, shutting down my third file. But the risk here very high. I don't want to play this. Or do I? If I play f3, it's bringing my f rook into the game. I'm threatening to capture his e pawn. I remember he's going to defend thusly, and then I have a problem. A difficult situation has occurred on the board. I'm starting to realize he has potential. I was thinking about h3. That prevents his queen coming to g4. He could try the same shenanigans on another square by maybe coming to e6 and g6. Now he's renewed the... Wow, difficult. If I move g3 and the queen comes to h6 with the idea of lifting and attacking my h2 pawn, which is now backwards, I have f3. I have f3 goes, let's say I take that way, he captures back. Now I have a check. Why is that important? Because I'm attacking his b7 pawn, plus I can double up on the file. But he can just oppose it with rooks. It's tricky. This is tricky. This surprisingly complex position. I'm sure there's a good move for black here that more or less deals with everything. But I don't know what it is. This sacrifice could be lights out. Oh, but he can't come queen check. So let's look at the sacrifice one more time. Rook takes g2 check. I got to take the material back. Now the queen comes with a very powerful check on the g4 square. My king forced, only move, king h1. Now he brings the second rook in, threatening mate on the g2 square. So I have to defend the g2 square, and I do that by moving my Rook to g1. Now he just takes the rook, and that's checkmate. All right, I think I'm going to have to play this. He's going to work up other threats. If he gives me time, I could move king g2, and then I can defend either pawn with the rook and the king while I'm also defending my light squares. At least the h3, not this one, but that's defended by the rook. We're going to play here. We're going to shut all this down. Okay. I think situation back under control. Now I think I want to take the dark squares and prepare for the advance here. Only thing I've lost is no more opportunities to play along the third rank from my rook. No more opportunities for a rook lift. By moving his pawn to f5, he has shut down the diagonal for the queen. I really think he should have considered putting the queen directly in the vicinity of my king and kept this attack on h open. I would have had to defend by f, and then he could have got a protected passer, etc. I'm not in a rush necessarily to get to these dark squares. Is this a threat? Yeah, well, I can't capture this way. Then he plays here. I've weakened my... Okay, now I'm seeing sort of the issues. If he plays here and I can't recapture because of the discovered check, the next move coming will be the incredible f3. Locking down my f-pawn and creating an unstoppable threat of mate. I can't even defend that square by moving my king, my g2. In fact, king g2 would be a mistake because it makes it even stronger. Folks, is it going to be f3? That's the question everyone's asking right now. Am I going to have to accept the fact that he's going to get a protected pass pawn out of this deal, at least due to these mating threats? I do have a temporary way of shutting it down. Now he can't play f4 because of my queen is stopping it. But he will put his queen on the dark square or even here to renew this threat. With my queen on d4, is this move... I'm going to... My eventual f3, is it going to be played? I think I still want my queen here to protect the a4 pawn so my rook can provide lateral defense. Perhaps the best way to head it off the mate was not to move the pawn in front of my shield, a violation, the pawn in front of my king, a violation of chess principles. Perhaps the best way to have dealt with this dire threat was simply to put my rook on g3 and accept the double pawns. Or even possibly this way, which would open my f and against his king. That was probably this was probably the move. I believe f3 is the playable move now. I am opening again second rank defense of my king. If he plays here in reply, I take, he takes. I can come across with the rook. It's dicey. The queen can come in and create threats. I still have to keep my queen on c2, I believe, due to this. f3 takes. Now my f rook is in the game. All right. I don't know. It's getting tight, folks. He comes to light squares instead. A little bit of a surprise. A bit of a surprise because where does he want? Here? He has a number of options. I might want to get this threat going. That might be, instead of being a winning ploy right now, threatening to queen coordinate my b pawn might be just what keeps the counterplay, keeps the balance. That's the deceptive plan. He wasn't after a diagonal, he was after a file, the e file. Now that pawn is just, if I can get in, if he tries, bless him, if Wally tries, rated 1800 chess.com, if he tries to play e3 with his pawn and I get in the mind-numbing f4, that pawn is overextended. I think I just want to exchange. Then his queen will take, threatening this pawn, menacing the light squares. But I think that's what I want to do. I just need to get my rook going, okay? And yes, he'll have a protected passer. We've already accepted the fact that the protected passer is an inevitability. Okay. Just like Skynet was inevitable, so is his protected pass pawn on e4. We're going to take it. He can't create mayhem with the queen, or more likely it's going to be the pawn. That definitely tempting. I can defend my d pawn in a number of ways, bringing my queen to d2, which was kind of the original plan anyway, because it supports the advance and allows this a3 rook more liberties. I've overprotected the pawn on a5 when it gets there. But I also can get that f rook going, blockading the f pawn, which is important because he wants to open the half-open file and open it all the way against my king and then combine. There's also quite a bit of danger of doubling. So rook f4, that shuts down opening the g file for the time being and threatens the queen and defends my d pawn, which is currently under attack, number one. But he does have a check. My king evacuates the back rank. That's an accelerator move. Once my king is off the back rank, it's fine. He runs into the welcome arms of the queen. And I've got all these files well covered if I put my rook on f4. Another idea is to put my queen on f2. This defends my d4 pawn and contains the threat of capturing f5 with check. And if he tries to advance, I can capture the pawn and the queen. It's nice. This is a nice geometric square for the queen. And I'm relying on my bishop to hold down the fort with regard to a4 for the time being. If I lose this pawn, it's not the end of the world. Except if he gets a free pawn and gets this rook in, they'll be up to mischief. I believe the move here is to threaten, defend. It's a multi-purpose move, slightly better than this one. I don't know if I want to allow this check. Bringing my queen now to the king. I do have a message from Wally. Oh, remember, Wally's supposed to be an endgame specialist. No wonder I'm getting resistance. Wally has said the endgame isn't going as well as I hoped. He's left a pawn, but he has an accelerator move check. And he will put in pressure. I don't want to lose the base of my pawn chain. Seems foolish. just for this pawn. The only reason I would do that was potential checkmates, and I don't think so. I think he's can cover all this. So that's out. We're not taking the pawn. I can move my f to e. Reason, his queen is a little precarious where she is. She cannot, if I got my f rook on the e file, the queen cannot drop back. Oh, by the way, Wally did say something. Did I mention that? I'm getting so punchy now. Are we in the third hour? I haven't even looked at the clock. Wally is saying this endgame isn't going as well as I hoped, end quote. Then he says something else. Remember, Wally's Scottish? He says, Nessie, no, she doesn't count as a dinosaur. He just throws that out there. Well, I'm glad your endgame isn't going as well as you hoped, Wally. Because otherwise I would have to ask myself, what am I doing here? E file can be open for this rook. That's devastating. He can't get into my position. He can no more infiltration. In fact, he's low on squares. So let's look at all the squares he would have available if I play rook e1. Take the pawn. No good. Can't take the pawn. Can't go here. Can't go here. Can't go here. Can't go here, 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 or here, and can't take the rook on e1. Can't go here. Can't go here. She has one square. She has one square and one square only. And that is g4. Still a slight annoyance for me because she's maintaining pressure against my backwards pawn. At that point, I might want to play a5. So I think I'm going to do this simply because it creates a threat and grabs a file. He has a lot of activity still. I want to get this rolling, like I said. As soon as I put the pawn on a5, he may end up having to blockade by rook to a6, and that's what I really want. That's what I really want in this position. I also have, lo and behold, rooks on 7th. Attacking the b pawn, that's a problem for him. Big problem. Then he's got big problems. Big problems at that point. I can even sacrifice this pawn to get another piece in time down to the second rank mate. Okay, and then he can defend. In fact, if I put the rook here, he'd probably play that. I could take a set of rooks off. But he also has check. Again with this. Okay, so that's why the rook can't leave. Again, that's another reason for moving a5. Does he have a threat? He does not have a threat. This might be coming. Not the end of the world. Not positive, but I can defend this pawn if I have to. So let's go here. We're going to a5. He played that. I said he couldn't do it. Wally's trying to play me for a fool here. Oh, yes, I see now. I can't take the pawn because queen takes queen and my pawn is pinned. That's clever. That's clever. He has blocked his route here. I can play here, followed by this, ignoring the threat. So let's look at ignoring the threat. I'm not worried so much about my light squares now with my queen in the vicinity of my king, covering that light square, covering the g2, the checkmating square. Queen, I think, well positioned. She does have an accelerated square if that f pawn comes off. I play here, now what? Rook takes, pawn takes. I'm one square or two squares away from coronation. If he does come here, that is a little bit of a cramp on my second rank if my rook ever leaves my last rank, I mean. Because there's a kind of a threat. But if he comes here, I got so much firepower. I can move my king up now, preventing the queen from coming in, but the real idea is to play queen f3. I'm kind of farting around with this queen. I'm not sure it's necessary. Is this a threat? That's the question. That's the salient question in this particular position. I could retake with my queen, believe it or not. I can retake with this rook because it's against his queen, then trade that off. I don't believe that that's a threat. I have options. I have three ways to take that fella. One of those three, or all three, or two of the three should work. If they don't, yeah, Wally's a genius. If I play a5 and he decides to sacrifice, or not sacrifice, but exchange the rooks, just place pawn. Okay, if I do play a5, the problem is I've lost, now the material's equal, but I have the protected pass pawn in, and I can play here immediately. Then I can defend it with a rook, and this other rook can eventually take the a6 and then come. Is this going to be sufficient defense? I will have, if both my rooks leave to shepherd home the b pawn, then I will have three pieces defending my king, and he will have four attackers at least. I could queen at the opportune moment, and that might force an attacker to leave, and that could have implications for the coordination of his pieces in the attack and how they defend each other. So I'll have a lot of resources once I get this passed pawn. But I can really ram the pawn down his throat, and I like the sound of that. What if I ram the pawn down his throat? Well, I'm opening the e-file for him then. That could be a factor. So if I leave the open e-file, now I'm ramming. I could ram all the way though, and if he never moves his rook from a8, he's blockaded the entire fiasco. But that's not the plan. The plan is not to queen the a pawn. The plan is to destroy the defense, the blockader on b7. So the question is, do I play a6 now because I don't believe this is the threat and I have time? Or do I try to magnify the threat, and now this is really dire because he can't even... Okay, so there's a lot of complication if this rook ever leaves and there's wholesale exchanges and he ends up with a rook with check on g3. Because it can come behind. And then it's not so easy for me. My king will be cut off. My king is not assisting with the b pawn on the queen side. I think it's wrong, but the move might be king g2. Why? Now there can't be wholesale exchanges with a rook landing on g6 with g3 with check. Then I can really start to think more about it. Boy. There's not going to be wholesale exchanges anyway with a rook on g3 as long as I keep my rook on a3, but that goes away the moment I play a6. Wow, some real tough decisions here, chess fans. I'm going to go with Neanderthal chess because Neanderthal chess often best. All right. Oh, yeah, I see it. I see it. The rook here, devastating. That might force my queen. I think I might have to play that. Yeah, I don't know. This might have been wrong. There's a lot of activity. Maybe I should have thought about how do I exchange his heavy pieces off. I had trouble also against. I still won, but I had trouble. I didn't even have trouble. Well, it wasn't easy for me to prosecute my endgame advantages in a previous game against a bot when he had such piece mobility. I think I'm losing. I feel like I'm losing my grip on this game. I can't switch rooks. Now what are you gonna do? Maybe that's it. I've got to watch this entrevue. I knew giving up the e-file was really risky just to carry this devastating threat. Okay, so we've basically had a changing of the guard because my intent now, I think the move that's occupying the hamster wheel in my mind is to cut this communication between a rook on e2, a black rook on e2, not my rook, a black rook on e2, deep in my position, and the queen on g4, the black queen. Plus, I'm threatening to take this isolated pawn. If he tries to exchange, then maybe my queen, maybe the rook, he could get behind it. I take, there's always this check, which is a little tricky. He has this, but there's, this is coming. What if I played this now? How devastating is this? And I let it go. Now I go here. Okay. He takes the queen. It's not check. It's not check. I queen. He takes. I take. Check. It's not enough. I can't sacrifice my queen. Let's cut. Okay. That's a little passive, my friend. Here, check. Double check. The most devastating move in chess. Bring the second rook up. Now my back rank is weak, but he doesn't have access to it. Play a 6. Take the pawn. What happens if I take the pawn? Takes. Rook takes. It's the same deal. I can't take the pawn. What if I... Okay, well, what if I insist on taking the pawn? You're going to take pressure off my A pawn. Fine. I'm going to add pressure to your F pawn. You come back saying, okay, well, we'll trade F for A. I'm like, okay, I'll take your F pawn. I'll get a tempo against the queen. I'll come down to your 7th rank. And instead of undermining your B pawn with my A pawn, which is be gone, I will undermine it with a rook. How's them apples? If I play here and pawn takes, if there's all these heavy pieces come off, let's say I move my rook here and we go for the major standoff, heavy pieces and pawns against each other. If everything comes off, this wins. Either my pawn races through, or if he captures, my B pawn races through. So here we go. Let's line it up. Neanderthal chess. My plan was to let everything come off. My king is the wild card here. I haven't fully calculated this. I have not fully calculated this. This is too devastating to allow to exist. If I take with my rook, his rook takes my queen. I take his rook. He comes, takes, that's a check. I take his other rook off. Then he takes this pawn. I go here. He takes, I try to run. His rook gets behind it. But I don't have to try and run. I could go rook to A1. He still gets behind it. I could go rook to B. If I go rook to B, then his rook gets behind the A pawn, shutting that. So I don't believe that's a possibility. I think I take with my queen, then with my pawn. I can't let these rooks in. He takes there. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook. Queen takes rook. That's mate. He's got to stop the mate. But that's check. See, the reverse check prevents me from winning the queen. Pawn takes pawn. I'm still pinning myself. Pawn takes pawn. If he goes here, it takes... that's check. It's the same thing. Gets an active rook. Rook takes pawn. There's also this tactical nuance. If I do queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check, devastating. My queen is pinned. He's going to win his queen. He's going to clean house. Did I blunder, folks? After all this, we got this far together. Queen take pawn is out because of this check. Rook, I don't think works. It's going to have to be pawn, which I don't think works either, but I don't know. The check is coming again, but you know what? I'm not the only one with the weak king. I'm not the only one. Might be end up being a perpetual. I'm not sure I understand his play. I'm not sure I understand his play. He surely had better than that. Surely. Surely he had better. Why not take it now? Why? Am I getting a mulligan, essentially? I just pinned the queen, can't I? This is a bit of nastiness. I pinned the queen. I don't understand why he didn't check me. I don't know. It's too complicated. I guess I had the resource. I don't know. I pinned the queen to the king. If we exchange, I lose with a check, right? But I have my own threats. I go here threatening the rook. I really want to get my king to defend this pawn. Is that pawn really critical? Because my rook here could take a rather inconsequential pawn at the moment, the h pawn, but with a pawn that could become important. I might have to lose this pawn to defend this pawn. And why is that important, chess fans? Because what really matters right now is these two pawns. All rook pawn endgames are drawn. He might have enough resources to draw. He's going to have an active rook. Queen here. Again, I'm still relying on the fact. Queen here. Queen takes. That's check. I don't know. He gets his rook active behind this pawn chain. I don't want it. rook to d, defending this pawn, very passive. Takes, check, check. I don't know, king here, king to f2. Rook comes over. My rook is here on d. I'm not really gaining anything. Doesn't work for me. This pawn falls, and it's a probable draw. He is actually up a pawn. I lost the handle. I might just have to play with an active rook. When he comes to king to g7, he's going to be defending this pawn. I still have very strong threats. With his rook trying to chew down my pawns, it's going to take him time to get through all that beaver, through all my lumber, and get to b6. And if his rook ever has to come back and defend, that may be losing. Even if I lose this FA pawn, that will take him a lot of time. Here, I think, is the move. I think it's the only move. Okay, now Wally's saying, let's play a long endgame. What do you say? Well, I don't have much to say about it. It is what it is. I believe he's going to defend this pawn. Let's see what he decides. This is not so easy for him. Here, 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 and here. Also here and here, but that he goes here. So this pawn's got to come off. That's rule number one. Now I'm going here with this as the threat. He's going to check me. I think that means he has problems, because he's just bringing my king into the game. And my king wants to be over on the queen's side. Yeah, I don't understand. I don't think that's great for him. I think he's... Wally, you said long ending, but that's not what's happening. I bet the machine had a way to win. Check. Comes here, so I got to put pressure right now. Now he's in trouble. Bad trouble. His king pinned to the back rank. That's disadvantage number one. I have mating threats. I can penetrate with my king, take this pawn, then I have two connected passed pawns. He might, in best scenario, get his d pawn to run, but I'm easily closer. Do I want to go here and here next? Can he stop that? Yeah, so why not just play here and here? Let's just take the material. We're just going to chew him to death. Look at this. We're going to step ladder him. It doesn't help. Okay, I got to be careful. Is there checks? No. Okay, I got to step ladder him. This is just devastating. Alright, it's game over at this point. I personally think when all this shenanigans was happening, that he had something, and the computer showed mercy. The only way we'll know for sure is the computer evaluation at the end. I think he's playing very poorly at the moment. But sometimes when the computers are in a really bad situation, they have threatening mate. They make really bad moves. And they'll be threatening mate again. This is also... Now I'm threatening mate again. That draws his king further away. Now here and here, and when I queen, I can check, take his rook. There's also just simply a check here, followed by a check here, followed by a queen. So this is the fastest way to queen. Now, queen is coming. I want to keep my accuracy ratings alive here. Where's the mate? Here, here, and here's, or here is the mate. His bishop, his rook is going to try to interfere with the whole proceeding. possibly by going here too. This is the L. I'm gonna form the L. There is some pins. I'm trying to do this efficiently because I don't want to interfere with my accuracy rating. There's rook here, threatening here or here. He moves there. That threatens mate either on this square, he can't stop it. I go here, his king goes here. Check, he goes back, it's nothing. Wow, what's the easiest, most efficient way to do this? Oof, I don't know. Where's he going to run? There and there. So I want to cut off this. I have two ways to cut it off. Rook or queen. Two ways to cut him off at the pass at the 6th file. Queen might be slightly better than the rook. That's going to mate him. Rook. Defends it. Queen here, check. He only square. Rook here, check. Queen here, check. Only square. Rook here, threatening mate here and here. He can't stop it. He has a check. He has a spite check. And shuts everything down. Maybe there. Oh, okay. Oh, did you see the potential devastation? I thought for a moment I might have stalemated him. All right, that was a real humdinger. The computer says, you're quite strong. I won't go so easy next time again. Well, I think I lost control of the position. Only the evaluation would say. So far, the initial critique by the machine is 1 mistake, 0 blunders, 0 miss wins. I'm sure there's a lot more mistakes than that. Thank you very much for following. This is another long one. These 1800 bots, difficult, providing me a lot of difficult, and plus I'm getting very talkative. I did well considering I wasn't at my best. I really think I was winning the game throughout, except at the end. Have a great day.